Thanks for listening to the ArtTactic Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Green. While we often focus on the major art hubs like the US, Europe, and even Asia, it's essential to occasionally turn our attention to other regions to see how their art markets are evolving. So in this week's episode of the podcast, we explore Africa following the conclusion of ArtX Lagos' 9th edition of the fair. How has the fair developed over the years? What does the art ecosystem look like in this part of the world? And what does the future hold for Africa's growing presence in the global art market? We unpack all these questions with independent journalist Rebecca Anne Proctor, who was there in Lagos for the fair. We hope you enjoyed the episode. Thanks so much for listening. Rebecca, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, Adam.
Absolutely. So ArtX Lagos just celebrated its 9th edition. It's pretty incredible that it's already been 9 years. I remember when they announced the inaugural edition. And so you attended the fair this year, and I believe it was your third time visiting the fair. For those unfamiliar, can you share a brief history of the fair and how has it evolved over the years?
ArtX Lagos, as you said, is the premier and one of the only fairs in West Africa, in Lagos, Nigeria, and it was launched in 2016, and it's had 8 editions so far. It was launched by Tokini Peterside Shwebig, a Nigerian entrepreneur and art collector, and she became really passionate to showcase and support the breadth of contemporary art from Africa and its diaspora. And this fair, I know, has been a huge passion project for her and for everybody in West Africa because they really felt this was a really needed. There was a lack of having a fair within this region of Africa. I mean, there's 154 in Marrakesh. There's also art fairs in South Africa, but West Africa, or Sub-Saharan Africa for that matter, hasn't had a fair dedicated to contemporary art. So this was a way to do it. My first visit to the fair was in 2019, before COVID, and it was really vibrant and exciting. And it was small still. There was about over 20 galleries. And there was a lot of hype, obviously, at the time for the African art market and for West Africa in particular, given the growth of galleries and institutions in Ghana and Nigeria. And it's since continued. I mean, due to COVID in 2020, they had the fair online, like many fairs did. And then they went back to the physical fair in 2021, which was considerably smaller. And yes, they've had subsequent editions of the fair. They have been smaller and smaller in size. This year was the smallest ever. The smallest ever. It had the same amount as the previous year, 10 galleries. So it's shifted a lot, but I think that's also to reflect the current economic state, not just of Nigeria, but of the global art scene.
And so how would you say this year's fair compared to some of the previous editions?
Yes. Right before I was about to go to this year's fair and I was speaking with Tokini and her team, they kept telling me that they really wanted to see the fair more as a platform, rather than just a commercial art fair, but a platform to enhance and grow the visibility of art from Nigeria and West Africa and the greater continent. But I think in that said, there's still obviously a strong commercial element, and everybody who did attend very much noted that there were very few galleries. I mean, 10, some collectors told me, and also other people attending, that they, felt so strongly they're so proud of the fair, but they felt that, 10 galleries isn't perhaps enough for an art fair. That said, it seemed to be really busy, and there was a lot of buzz on the opening VIP night. Galleries that I've met were selling. There's galleries from London, like Tiwani Gallery or Affinity Gallery, a young gallery based in Lagos, Nigeria. There was also Art Space, also from Lagos, Nigeria, and there were sales. Sales were swift. The prices, I wouldn't say were as high, perhaps as I've noticed in previous years. I think they, ranged from a few thousand to maybe in the tens of thousands. There might have been a few exceptions, but there was, before the fair, speaking to a few gallerists and collectors, seemed to be a lot of concern over whether people would buy, just because the naira, which is the local currency in Nigeria, weakened literally I think about a week or so before the fair. According to Bloomberg, the naira weakened 4.3%, the most since October 15th, to one naira equaled 1,670 naira to the dollar, which is, I think, pretty scary for Nigerians. Nigerians are known, they love collecting art, they love fashion, they're extremely vibrant, and they're known to be spenders of art, I think, throughout sub-Saharan Africa. But they're definitely, I think this year, it just felt there was a bit more caution. But and that said, there's still, people came out, they came to party, they came to enjoy art. I think everyone is extremely proud of the work that was on show. But I definitely did notice a bit more concern, as I've noticed in other capitals over the last few months, about the art market in general.
And so when we look at the African art market over the last few years, there's been increasing domestic demand and also a surge in interest from international collectors, galleries, and curators. And I think this combination fueled rapid growth in the market. However, lately it seems that things have started to slow down there, perhaps due to a saturation of certain aesthetics, such as black portraiture, or just simply a waning of interest from international collectors. Is that what you're seeing there? And how is the African art market managing through this?
Yes, no, I totally agree with you. I think we've, since 2016, actually the year that ArtX Lagos launched, and maybe perhaps a few years before, there has been definitely a boom. I mean, you can quantify a boom in various different ways, but for African art that hadn't had as much visibility in the international art market, there were huge price increases. I mean, we've seen by the likes of Mwaka Boafo, for example, from Ghana, a variety of different artists whose prices just soared over the last few years. But as you rightly pointed out, I think, Adam, there's been a bit of a saturation, I think, particularly when it came to Black portraiture. It seems like, a lot of emerging artists, when some artists made a lot of money very fast from certain portraits or certain styles of painting. I think when I visited Ghana over the last few years, there was a real, I would say, almost overproduction of just paintings of figuration, Black figuration, which was beautiful to see. And it obviously was selling really well at the time in a lot of international art fairs, and also locally. But that's definitely gone way down. There's been speculation on that, as has been reported. And the prices that went way up have also come down. Obviously, I think due to speculation in the market and oversaturation, but also due to the fact that the art market itself is also slower, past the last few years of challenges in the global market. But for example, we saw earlier this year, one Ghanaian artist who sold at auction in 2021 for $189,000 was put up to auction again earlier this year, Emmanuel Taku, and his price had plunged to just $10,160. And that's a big difference, obviously. So I think for up-and-coming artists who made it big a few years ago, this plunge has been pretty tough. And I know that I have heard whispers, and including in Nigeria, of, let's kind of stay away from too much figuration or painting when we do exhibitions. I don't see as much of that at the fairs that I did see before. I see more, mixed media, which also represents Africa. It represents sort of the heritage of Africa, African art and creation. And I see a lot more experimentation with different media, whether it be found objects, or painting, or even tech, digital, in the digital realm. So yes, I think there's definitely a lot of concern, but there's sort of it seems like there's new directions and new trends and new artistic styles that are coming out of this sort of, what would you call it, an upheaval or a market slump in this domain.
And what does the art ecosystem in Lagos look like, and what steps can be taken to help it grow and evolve as the market recovers?
Yeah, I mean, Lagos is a wonderful city. It's filled with a lot of galleries and a lot to see. There's also Gas Foundation, which is Yinka Shonibare's foundation he's set up, which is a beautiful space that I visited the first time actually this year. And there's a new museum. There's new museums in the work. There's a museum now that's dedicated to Yoruba history and culture. Not as much contemporary art, but there's also the Yemsi Shylon Museum that's just for contemporary art just outside of Lagos, on the outskirts of the city. And it's a huge museum that the Prince Yemsi Shylon, which is a huge, he's been a huge collector and patron for art in Nigeria and around Africa, established in 2019. I visited that when it first opened. So there is a great ecosystem. I'm speaking about Nigeria now, and then in neighboring Ghana's been, I think it's definitely it's been one of the pioneers for this resurgent, I wouldn't want to say resurgence, but sort of, new way of looking or coming, sort of a new time for African art. Gallery 1957, founded by Marwan Zakam, and that also opened in 2016, if I'm not mistaken. That's been a huge, that gallery has been a huge game changer for the market, and just for visibility. It's brought, the gallery brings over, as do other foundations in West Africa, a lot of collectors and other artists to showcase and to do cultural exchanges. But there's also there's new residencies that have been set up and new foundations by artists themselves. So without a lot of state patronage, there's Ibrahim that, artists themselves or private collectors are giving back and helping the scene. In Tamale in northern Ghana, there's Ibrahim Mahana's his own space, various spaces, which are doing a lot to help the local community through art and encourage art production. I mean, Mwako Boafo has his own studio, which is also helping a lot of artists. And then I also think it's important to note, the African-American community and artists like Kehinde Wiley, who was there during ArtX Lagos, Black Rock, Senegal, and I think there's a Black Rock, Nigeria that's going to be opening. I'm not sure when, but is in the works. That's his own way of coming back to Africa and doing something for the local community. So there's a lot happening, but definitely the markets people are concerned, and it's still young. It doesn't have the price points for African art, or not at all what the post-war and contemporary price points are, and it's been a lot of players from abroad and domestically have worked to kind of establish this market. And so I think there's excitement and things are going forward, but there's a lot of concern as they are elsewhere. At one point also, I thought one other point, which you'd mentioned before, I think is crucial to note, is there's still a great need for an African collector base. I think this is a market that's still very much reliant on international collectors, artists and gallerists, dealers, auction houses. They're selling, I think, a high majority of the works that are produced are to global collectors all over the world, not just America or Europe, but also in Asia increasingly. So there's still a need to find a way to establish more of an African collector base. Obviously, that depends on price and the whole ecosystem and understanding of art, appreciation for art, which there is obviously already a lot, but it's still a market that has this interesting dance or ties with the global art community. And
so this situation, while not identical, it reminds me somewhat of the Chinese art market from maybe 2004 to 2007, when artists had been responding to their experiences during the Cultural Revolution, and they gained significant attention from international collectors, and their work started to appear frequently at global auctions, not just in China. Over time, however, that international interest waned, and the market became primarily supported by domestic Chinese collectors. While this doesn't necessarily mean the same will happen in Africa, I think it does highlight the importance of a strong domestic ecosystem, one supported by galleries, collectors, and curators there. Do you see some parallels with that here? And I do think it seems like African artists who have been successful, they are helping contribute to grow and develop the African ecosystem through residencies and other programs. And I imagine that's highly impactful.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, it has been some comparison being made exactly to what you said, China's art market, which just boomed, and then suddenly slowed, beginning in the 2000s. So kind of some people have made this parallel with the African art market boom and kind of slow growth. I think, there's always particular context at heart to these sort of, I don't know how you want to call them, rises and falls, I guess. But you definitely, you do need to have a strong domestic market. There's a lot of challenges in that, but there's also a lot of potential. I see, I think the art that's being created in Africa is incredible, and it's definitely piqued so much interest overseas in the last few years. And gallerists and dealers from the African continent, they're showing in Hong Kong and New York and LA, and so there's a market, a need for it, but there's definitely, obviously, a lot of challenges that go with, shipping artworks out of Africa and just the whole infrastructure, to make it a reality. So I think there's definitely more to watch, and more potential, I hope, to be seen within Africa itself. And I think Artix Lagos, as much as people speculated and thought, okay, is this how will this go forth as an art fair? I understand Takini and her team's desire to make it, a platform. I mean, there's many more exhibitions, events, talks, panels. So there was a lot of programming this year, I think more so than ever before. And that's all wonderful. I think if you have both components, the market, but also the programming, that can only make it richer. I think the times are challenging financially there and elsewhere. So that's basically what I felt. That said, people do buy when the price is good and they like the art.
Exactly. Well, we'll just have to keep watching this space and seeing how the market there develops. Rebecca, thanks so much again for coming onto the podcast and sharing your perspective after having been in Lagos for ArtX Lagos, as well as your overall thoughts on the art market there. And if our listeners don't follow you on social media already, they definitely should. Where can we find you there?
I'm on Instagram, Rebecca Anne Proctor, and then I'm also on LinkedIn, same, Rebecca Anne Proctor. I am on X, although not using it as much as before. Same, my full name. That's where you can find me. Or you can just pick up my articles, I guess.
Perfect. Thanks so much again, Rebecca. I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.